Welcome to the review and recap, GCSE History, Making of America, 1789 to 1900. There are 5 themes within Making of America. These are American Expansion, 1781 to 1838, the West, 1839 to 1860, Civil War and Reconstruction, 1861 to 1877, Settlement and Conflict on the Plains, 1861 to 1877, and American Cultures, 1877 to 1900. Before we look at any of these in detail, I'm going to go through a few key definitions and groups that you will need to know to enable you to succeed on the course. First of all, we're going to go through the different systems of government and how each of them worked. I would recommend that you make notes as we go through or highlight key things in your notes if you've already got this from class. But I'm just going to explain what each of these systems of government are, and these are very, very important throughout the course. The first part of the system of government then is the Constitution. This is basically the set of rules which stated how America should be run. These rules are always referred back to, even though they were created by the founding fathers of America, for example, George Washington. So even though these rules were made straight after America got their independence, after fighting the British, these rules keep being referred back to many years later, and this will cause a few issues as we go through the course. There is then Congress. This is the group of people who passed laws for America. So I think the easiest way to remember this is by thinking that it's America's version of Parliament. We then have the President. This person is elected every 4 years. The president can make and block laws, so he's definitely going to be the most powerful person when we are looking at the different groups of politicians within America. And I want you to think of it as America's version of the Queen and the Prime Minister combined, so extremely powerful. We then have the Supreme Court. This court heard the nation's most challenging court cases and decided who was guilty by consulting the Constitution. So if a case goes here, this is the last court it can go to and their decision is final. And they will look at those original rules created by the Founding Fathers, which we've said is called the Constitution, to decide whether somebody or group of people are guilty or not. We then have the states. The states are areas that have a high population. They can make their own laws as long as they are in line with the Constitution. They have their own governor and their own system of government. So even though they have to listen to the president, they have to follow the Constitution, they also have individual laws and rules within their area. They can also vote in national elections, and they are encouraged to do so. Some people believe that the state should have more power. Some people believe they should have less power. And that is, again, going to be a problem that we're going to see crop up as we go through the course. Finally, we have territories. These are areas of land without enough people to become a state. So territories are likely to become a state provided that enough people go to that area, and we will see that this happens a lot through the course. As a territory becomes more and more popular, it then becomes a state. So we're going to have a look at some of the reasons why that was. Now, people there will want their territory to become a state because until it is, they do not have the right to vote in national elections, so they don't have a say in who the President of the United States is. Okay, we then need to know the difference between 3 types of American people. They are the white Americans, the Indians or the Native Americans. We will use both terms as we go through the course. You could also have both terms on your examination paper, so you need to be aware that they may be called Indians or Natives. And we then have black Americans. Black Americans can also be referred to as African Americans. So the white Americans, first of all. So they or their families had arrived to America from Europe. So everyone in America that is white has an immigrant background. They have arrived to America from Europe. They could vote if they lived in a state, remember, rather than a territory, and if they owned property. So you have to be pretty wealthy to be able to vote. Most white Americans own their land, so between 60 and 90% of white males could vote in the USA. So white Americans have a reasonable say and tend to be relatively wealthy. We then have the Indians or the Native Americans. These group of people are known as the indigenous people within the USA. Now, Indigenous would be a great term to use in your exam, and all it means is the original people within the USA. So these people have not emigrated to America. They have always been there. They lived in tribes, and many came into conflict with white Americans who were trying to expand into native land. So because they'd always been there, when the white Americans started to arrive from places in Europe, these natives desperately tried to hold on to their land, and unfortunately they end up in conflict as a result of that. The natives can vote, but only if they pay US taxes, so many don't have the right to vote. Finally, we have Black Americans or African Americans. The vast majority of African Americans lived in the USA as slaves. They had no right to vote, so they have no political power. And in the Constitution, which remember is that set of rules, it stated that people's property could not be confiscated. The North saw slaves as people, the South saw them as property. So that's going to be really, really important. Finally, we're going to have a look at the differences between the North and the South. In the North, economically, they pretty much have an economy that is based on factories, businessmen, and they pay more to their workers. Their workers have a little bit more say as they can threaten to go on strike. So the businessmen try and keep their workers happy wherever possible. In terms of religion, the majority of people are Christians, such as Methodists and Quakers. They speak out against slavery because they believe it's immoral, so they believe that it's wrong, and they believe that God had made all men free. So that's a lot of people within the North. Politically, they did not believe that slaves should be counted within the population count of a state, as they didn't want the South to gain more power. So this isn't them saying that slaves should be treated equally. It's to do with power. They don't want the South to have more power. And if you counted every slave that worked in the South of America, the South would start to have more power than the North, and that's not what they want. And the North believe in a strong central government. So remember we spoke about the fact that some people believe that states should be more powerful. The North believe that the central government should be stronger, so the President and Congress, rather than the states themselves. If we compare this to the South, the South's economy is based on cotton plantations, so basically large farms. It's much better to use the word plantation in your exam, so please get used to it. They use slave labour, so remember they use African Americans to harvest the cotton for them, and they don't pay them. And they also grow crops such as tobacco and rice, and as I've said, they use slaves to pick these. So they do not have to pay their workers, and that makes them extremely wealthy. In terms of religious beliefs, they are Christian, but they believe that God has made black people to serve white people. So an extremely racist view, but that is the view of many in the South. Politically, they have come up with quite a strange compromise. They said that slaves would class as 3/5 of a person in the population count of a state. Now, this might seem strange because you might think, why would they want to recognise that slaves are a person? But remember, the more people you have, the more political power you have. So they class slaves as 3/5. That means that they can still have some power from them, but they are not equal. Slaves did not have the right to vote, which we've spoken about, and this is what the South believed. And finally, they believed in a weaker central government and strong states' rights. So completely opposite from the North, they believe that the President and Congress should have less power and the states should have more power. So they are some of the key things that you need to make sure that you understand in order to get a grip on the course as we go through the 5 different topics.